Uh, Good morning, one and all present here. This is the webinar from Ashok and Rita Patel Institute of Physiotherapy, the Constituent Institute of Charotar University of Science and Technology, Changa. We welcome you all in today's webinar. Today's speaker for the webinar is Dr. Pavithra Rajan. She is a community physiotherapist from India. She has completed her master's from Canada and currently she is pursuing her PhD at Faculty of Medicine and Health, the University of Sydney, Australia. She has already published more than 50 research papers in international peer-reviewed journals. She is sub-editor on textbook for community physiotherapy, and her research interests are community rehabilitation, rural and remote health, musculoskeletal rehabilitation, and evidence-based practice. So over to you, Dr. Pavithra Rajan, ma'am, for today's session.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me all right? Yeah, all right. Thank you, Dr. Dave and Dr. Bala, for giving me this opportunity to interact with your students, although virtually this time. It's always good to come back to ARIP and interact with the students. Now, without wasting much time, I've prepared a presentation for today. Uh, um, so let me quickly share that with you. All right, excellent. So as you all know, the topic for today is role of physiotherapy in the community. And as Dr. Dave has already introduced me, I'm in my final year PhD studies in musculoskeletal community physiotherapy, and have been recently appointed as a postgraduate teaching fellow with the Discipline of Physiotherapy at the University of Sydney in Australia. So just to let you all know the topics that will be discussed today, I'm going to give you a bit of information on my background, just to let you know the biases that come with today's presentation, and also to let you know that most of the examples and the context of today's presentation is quite experiential. It's mostly based on my experience and my research work and my reading. So just having that disclaimer before we begin the presentation. Secondly, of course, the major topic that we discussed today is community physiotherapy, which has been my passion, been my work, been something that I've always been interested and intrigued for the past 15 years. So we'll go about first with the definition, followed by the components of community physiotherapy and the different types. And within the types, we are going to look at three major types of community physiotherapy. That's research, action research, and academic. All right. So while Dr. Dave has already given you a brief introduction, I wanted to tell you a little bit on how I ended up being a community physiotherapist and learning to enjoy this journey of mine. So, as you all know, I started off doing my undergrad studies in India in 2007, completing my studies in 2007. Um, Ended up doing a bit of research in community physiotherapy as part of my undergraduate program. Worked in few hospitals in India before going to Canada to do my Master of Science with the Faculty of Kinesiology and Recreation Management. Uh, Again, worked with the community of older adults there. Came back to India, stayed there for a couple of years before moving to Australia in 2017 in order to begin my PhD studies. Now, during my time in India, during my undergraduate studies and the short time after returning from Canada and moving to Australia, these are the various states that I've worked on community research projects. So I'm basically from Maharashtra. So that's where I've lived and studied and worked for most of my life. So that's one of the states where I've worked quite extensively in the field of community physiotherapy. Secondly, thanks to certain NGO connections in Gujarat and the ARIP connection with Dr. Bala and Dr. Dave, I've had a little bit of exposure in Gujarat as well. And I was working as a research scholar with an NGO in Mumbai on community oncology. And as a part of that project, I've visited communities in Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Jharkhand, and Chhattisgarh. And my last project, that was with the Canadian government through the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, was based in Karnataka. So you can see the footer where you have it's a book chapter that we wrote, and this was a project which was with the community of mothers and children in all the districts of Karnataka. So I've kind of had a fair bit of experience, I can say, working in different communities in India, and this has led to some research publications. I'm not sure if you have had the opportunity to go through them, research publications and certain academic pursuits as well in this field. And these are some of the photographic evidences of my work in community physiotherapy. So the one with the small child and the one the the one on the far left and the one on the far right top, those are from the northern parts of India, while the ones where you see with mothers and children, that's from Gujarat. So I'm going to, since it's pertaining to where you students are from, I'm going to give you a bit more information on how we went about with the project. All right, so now let's look at some theoretical concepts. So firstly, community physiotherapy, how would you define it? So if you go to look in textbooks or online, it's very difficult to find one generic definition. Like each one defines community physiotherapy in very different ways. My experience with working with communities has led me to define community physiotherapy as the physiotherapy services which are provided in the community of the patient. So there is a paper of mine that distinguishes community physiotherapy from community-based physiotherapy. So those are two different concepts. If you can go back, if it's of any interest to you, you can go back and read more about that. So in today's lecture, we'll be just talking about community physiotherapy. So usually the community of the patient is where he lives. So some examples of community physiotherapy would be village medical camps. I'm pretty sure you students might have the privilege of visiting the wonderful remote communities that you have around your institute, and also visiting their homes in order to do some data collection or just checking on them on how they are doing. So those kinds those kinds of examples would come under community physiotherapy. So this community physiotherapy is one aspect of rehabilitation. The other is institution-based rehab, where the patient comes to you. So you have a hospital at ARIP, right? You have a physiotherapy OPD. So when the patient comes to the OPD and you see the patient there, that would be an institution-based physiotherapy or institution-based rehab. While community physiotherapy is where you go to the patient, you go to the patient's community, you go to the patient's home, right? So that's the major difference, broadly speaking, between community physiotherapy and institution-based physiotherapy. Now, moving on, while there are many components, so we have moved on from the definition of community physiotherapy to the types of community physiotherapy. This is the components of community physiotherapy. So there are many components of community physiotherapy, but the most important ones, are listed here. So first we have the type of setting. So what kind of setting does your patient or your client, that's how they're called here. We don't call our patients as patients, they're called as clients. So the type of setting in which your patient lives. All right, we'll have a look at that as well in the coming slides. Secondly, you need to look at what the resources are that are available. So do you have any kind of funding for the project? The community of patients that you're looking at, are they rich enough to travel to, maybe say ARIP, your institute or your OPD, to come and, come and seek services at the institution rather than you going to the community? Or do you have the funds for you to travel to the community? So a lot of things, and resources doesn't mean only the monetary ones. You also have to check if you have the right manpower. And by manpower, it's not just the number of people, but also the required expertise. All right. So a lot of things come under resources. All right. Secondly, then thirdly, the most important, I would say, is the willingness of the community to participate. So if the community doesn't identify a problem in themselves, it's very difficult to rehabilitate them. Say, for example, there's a high incidence of obesity. Now, obesity and diabetes are two lifestyle disorders that are on the rise in India. And and you, as a community physiotherapist, want to make a difference in their lives. Unless the community feels that diabetes and obesity are issues for them, it's very difficult for you to go and rehabilitate them. So willingness of the community to participate is very important. That's, I think, one of the prime components I would consider for the success of your project. So, how would you determine if the community is willing to participate or not? I'll give you an example here with one of my PhD projects. So, one of my PhD projects is looking at the Indian migrant communities with back pain, and they live in different parts of Sydney. So, that's where I'm based here in Australia. So they live in different parts of Sydney, and I don't know them. And the thing with migrant communities is they tend to be very closed. It's very difficult for an outsider like me, who's not part of their community yet, to come and do data collection and research and all of that. So you need to find an insider or someone who knows the communities well, someone whom the community trusts. You go to the communities using this insider or this person, and then that will increase the chances of success of your project. So there are different ways to go about that. Or if the community themselves identify a problem, which happened with one of the hospitals here, where there was an increase in the number of back pain issues with a certain Indian migrant community at one of the hospitals here. So the hospital approached the university where I'm doing my PhD, and that's how the project came into being. So it can be either way, but there has to be a willingness among the community to participate in your project or your research work. All right. Moving on, the long term planning. Now, it's very easy to do a project and forget about it, but that's not how community physiotherapy works. What example can I give you? Say, for example, there is a patient undergoing a total knee replacement. Now he comes to the hospital, gets the knee replaced, you do some good rehab, the patient is absolutely fine, goes back home, gets back to his normal domestic and work activities, and is all good. So there's not much need to follow up in that case, as much as in a community where there's increase in the number of obesity or stroke cases or diabetes, and you have to keep following up with them because those are all progressive kinds of health conditions. All right. So, especially in community physiotherapy, long term planning is very important because the nature of the project or nature of community physiotherapy is such that it doesn't end in one sitting, right? In one instance or in one visit. All right. So, that, I guess, should give you a bit of background, but I'm going to expand on each of these points as we go further. So firstly, I was talking about, sorry, let's go back, type of setting. All right. So firstly, it's the geographic consideration. So I've had the privilege of visiting rural Uttar Pradesh, rural northern India, and I've been part of a project here in rural Australia. So let me give you, so you know about rural Uttar Pradesh, where, it's quite difficult. It's quite difficult for us to reach this particular village in Uttar Pradesh, while rural Australia, the time it took for us to reach this place from Sydney, where I'm based, we took a flight from here to another city, Dubbo, was an hour's flight, and then from there we drove 4 hours to reach this village. It's not called a village, but let's call it a village so that it's easier for us to understand. So if you look at these two photographs, you can see a huge difference in the rurality in the two countries. So that itself tells you that rehabilitating someone in rural India can be a challenge just because of the geographical nature of the community in which the patient lives, right? And if you look at the picture on the right of rural Australia, you can see there's a telephone line. That means there's some amount of communication that's possible. Look at the roads. They look pretty good, not the best, but look pretty good. If you look behind the telephone tower, you can see a few houses there. They look well built. While if you look at the thatched house here, you can say that the living condition is not as good. So definitely, anyone would agree that rehabilitating someone from rural India is going to be more challenging than rehabilitating someone from rural Australia. So the geographical considerations need to be kept in mind when you're planning a project or planning an intervention or planning a solution for a particular community. So moving on, resources available. Now, again, if you look at this photograph on the left of rural Uttar Pradesh, I'm not sure how easy it's going to be to rehabilitate, given that the resources are very limited. It was actually quite a challenge for us, firstly, to reach this village, and then trying to reach the particular community that we were interested in of pediatric oncology patients who were discharged from a large cancer hospital in Mumbai. So it's not easy, right? And we needed to travel a lot in order to reach this village on bumpy roads. So not everyone would be interested, right? We didn't have much staff who was interested in this project as well. So it's not quite easy in many ways in order to even reach this destination, leave alone rehabilitating someone there. All right. Now, if you look at the photograph on the right, it says, I'm not sure if you can read that. It says Brevarna Aboriginal Integrated Child and Family Center. So there was this huge building with excellent services, like excellent infrastructure, a place for a lot of play structures for the children to play, for mothers to sit and chat. There was a coffee machine and all of that there. So the resources that were provided for this particular village were excellent. And you already looked at the roads and the telephone towers, which tell you that transportation and communication wouldn't be a problem. And you will see more on the inside of this center in few photographs to come. So as you can clearly see that the resources in rural India, or a rural, how should I put it, a developing setting, that's a better way to say, is quite limited as compared to rural areas in developed settings. So that in itself would change the way you plan a project. So the way I planned my project with Indian migrant communities here in Australia is very different from the way I had planned the community project in rural India. All right. So moving on, community involvement. So that is very important. Again, it goes back to willingness of the community to willingness of the community to participate in your project. All right. So as you can see, that's quite a memorable photograph, which I wanted to share with you all. That's I think it was the sibling of a cancer child, a cancer survivor, a kid. And it was nice to reach their house, have a look at what's happening, and when there's a child with cancer, in the entire family gets affected. So it was nice to do a visit there, and more so it was because of the connections that the NGO had formed with these families. So it was easy for me to go and do some work with them. But the community was willing to get involved only because I was coming through the NGO. So if I'd just gone by myself and tried to do some work with them, I wouldn't think it would have been even possible. Rural Australia. So this is how it looks inside. Look at the big, playground-ish area where the kids like to come and play. They're given free food, just to get them to the community center and have some activities with them, and more so to give them education about healthy living. So as you can see, we are all sharing a piece of corn. I think it was July, so probably winter there. Yeah, it's quite sunny in winter here. So you can see that's how involved the community was there. So again, it was easy because we were going through the university to visit this particular rural village in northern NSW. The NSW is a state, New South Wales. That's where Sydney is. So you can see the infrastructure there. You can look at the cleanliness. Like definitely somebody is coming and keeping the place well, and that too in a very remote area in Australia. So you can see that the community involvement revolves a lot around the kind of connections that you make. So it's very difficult for you to go to a new community and try to influence them to agree on what you think their problems are and what solutions are better. But then you need an insider or someone they can trust for you to go ahead with your project. All right. So that's with the community involvement. Long term planning. So, urban slum India. This is in Gujarat. This was in Vadodara in the year, what does it say? 2012. Yeah. So, that was the time when I'd just come back from Canada and I was doing some work with this NGO, which I'll be talking about in the next slides. So, let's not waste a lot of time on this. So this is basically doing trying to understand what problems exist in the among the community dwelling women in an urban slum in Vadodara. So that was in 2012. I'll talk more about this later on. And this is in rural Australia. So as you can see, it's there's an ironbark project. I'm not sure if you can read that well, but there's an ironbark project where the Aboriginal communities or the native communities there that live in remote Australia, they were involved in making decisions about their own health, and because of which they are very involved in this. And this project, the Ironbark project, if you want, you can Google and check, has been running for many years. So the more you involve the community and more you empower them and allow them to take a decision about their health, the more easier it is for you to run the project on a long term. All right, even with the Urban Slum India project, I think we were able to run the project for about 2 to 3 years, which is highly commendable, given that the NGO was running out of funds and we had lot many other issues. So that's highly commendable, I felt, in a developing setting like India. All right, so these are the components of what we just talked about were the components of community physiotherapy. Now, moving on, we are going to talk about the types of community physiotherapy. Now, you're not going to get this information probably in any textbook because this is what I have put up here based on my experience and my knowledge that I've gained over these years. So, the three broad types of community physiotherapy projects that I've been involved in are firstly the research project. I can talk a lot about that because as a PhD student, that's primarily what you do. Second, action research, that's very important. So it's just not research, it's action research. We'll talk more about that. And the third one is academic projects, um, which should be easy to talk about. All right. So moving on, let's talk about research. So as the word says, as I think this talk is more for the first and the second year students. So you might not have been exposed to research yet. So let me give you a bit of background about what research is. So research, as the word says, is searching again. So there is something missing and you want to find out the reason for that or you want to fill the gap. So that is when you do research projects and try to find answers to certain problems that have been troubling you. Say, for example, you are a physiotherapist at a sports clinic and you're looking at sports related knee injuries. All right. So there is so you keep on doing your physiotherapy with concentric strengthening, with your icing, with your TheraBand training, etc., etc., but nothing helps, right? The patient goes back to the field and comes back again with another injury. So that means there is something amiss, something wrong, or something missing in what you do, and something else needs to be done. So how would you know what else needs to be done? So there is a way of there's a way. Firstly, you've identified the problem. Your problem is you need to find a good solution for knee injuries or rehabilitation of sports-related knee injuries. So what you do after that is you go back and look at the papers that have already been published in this area. So maybe one paper says that to rehabilitate knee injuries you need intensive eccentric strength training, which you have not included in your earlier protocol. Or the other paper says that you need to do a lot of icing in order to reduce the swelling and improve the healing. So then what you do is you try to incorporate these into your existing therapy protocol and try to see if it's helping in any way. So it's very easy to put it in one line, but there are a lot of steps that you need to do, and a lot of things you need to be very careful about when you're planning a research project. So you do the research, and then your patient goes to the field and doesn't come back with injury. That means introducing ice and eccentric knee strengthening exercise is very important for the player not to end up with more injuries. So that's kind of a research project, a very quick example, probably not the best way. I've not given you many details, but that's how you plan research projects. So you identify a problem, and then based on whatever evidence, that's what it's called, evidence, whatever research is available, you try to find out what people have done, what has worked, what has not worked, pick up the things that have worked, try it in your patients and see if it's helpful to them, and then that becomes a protocol. All right, so that's with research. Now in community physiotherapy, so that if you talk about community physiotherapy research, again it has to bring some benefit back to the community, or else the community wouldn't be interested in participating in your project. Yeah. So usually, just as in any research project, community physiotherapy research involves the following steps. First, very important, you need to get ethical clearance. Pretty sure ARIP has a ethical board, from where you can get your ethical clearances for any of your research projects. Here we have an ethical committee, human research ethics committee at the University of Sydney. So as a student at the University of Sydney, I have to get all my ethical clearances first. All right, so that's a huge process. It's very easy to put it in two words, but it's a huge process to get the ethical clearance. Now, with the Indian migrant community at a hospital here, I had to get clearance from the hospital as well. So it depends on which site, and there are different things, but ethical clearance is the first and foremost thing that you need to obtain prior to starting a project. Advertisement. So you have this ethical clearance, then you put up these advertisements in different clinics, saying that we have got this ethical clearance for this project. We are trying to check if the knee rehabilitation gets any better. So these are the details. If you have had a knee injury in the past year, were not able to go back to playing because of knee injury, blah blah blah, then please contact us. So you can put up these advertisements in different clinics, where you would think that your population of interest or your community of interest would be seeking treatment. Participant recruitment. So one player looks at the advertisement, calls you up and says that yes, I'm interested. Then what do? There are certain consent forms and certain patient information sheets that you need to discuss with them. And once they agree, then the patient has to sign the consent form, and then the patient is recruited. So you do your study, finish your study on your participants. You have all this data, then you do the data analysis. So that's a different ball game altogether. I'm just being mindful of the time. Still have about half an hour. I think we're doing really good with the time. Do the data analysis, and then finally, very, very important to publish, because if you go back to the steps of research, the first thing was identifying a problem. The second thing is you went back to evidence, right? You went back to seeing what has already been done and how you could use that information in your clinic, right? So unless you publish your findings, someone else would have to do your study again in order to find out, right? So you're saving a lot of time to many researchers. You're doing really a huge contribution by publishing, right? So it's very important that you publish your findings. All right. Now, so this is the second example of research that I can give you is my own PhD study here. So it's looking at chronic back pain among the Indian migrant community in Australia. Now, if you look at the photograph on the right, I mean, so difficult to say, right? This is Australia. Like, look at the number of Indians. Yeah, so the Indian migrant community here is apparently the third largest migrant community in Australia, and it almost forms 2% of the Australian population. That's huge, right? So that's why many universities and research bodies are interested in the Indian migrant community, right? So this is one of the celebrations that's happening in Brisbane, not Sydney. It's happening in Brisbane. But look at the Indians. It's very difficult to say that this is not India. Look at the number of people. All right. So usually, how a PhD research project or any research project works is you go back to your literature, go back to the previous research papers to see what has already been done. So that's the first thing I did. I went back to check what has been done among the Indian migrant community in Australia. So that's a review, like going back and reviewing papers. And then, since there was a need to do some translations of certain back pain questionnaires into Indian languages, because not all the population in Australia understands English very well. So that was important to do an adaptation study. Then I did a survey to understand the beliefs about back pain. And finally, based on the survey, we found certain gaps and we wanted to understand more about their beliefs about back pain. So we conducted some focus groups. So usually one study leads to the other. So it's almost like a chain. So you do one study, you find something missing, another study. So that's how usually research works until you end up finding an excellent solution and you stop. But usually it takes many years before you do that. All right. So this is the study that got recently published in the journal Disability and Rehab. And this was the adaptation study that I was talking to you about. Now, why is it Marathi? Why not any other language? Because we are planning to use these questionnaires in certain remote communities in Maharashtra. So when you're planning a research project, when you're planning a community research project, try to make it very useful, like very broad. I did the study here in Sydney, so it's going to help the Marathi patients who attend the back pain clinics here, but it's also going to be of use for the remote communities or even the urban population in Maharashtra, right? So that's being more pragmatic. So that's the word, pragmatic. So where your research is more useful in the real world setting. All right, so that's about research. Now going to action research, which I think is very important. I think it's more important than just doing research and getting publications. So let's look into what is action research. Now this diagram is an adaptation of Kurt Lewin's model on action research. Now, basically, what this diagram is telling us is you plan a project based on what problem you have identified. You take an action. So, an action would be an intervention. In our language, we would say it's an intervention, or you're providing a solution to the problem. Then you provide the solution and do an evaluation again, right? So that evaluation is usually the research that follows in order to see whether your intervention was effective or not. Now, when you evaluate, definitely there would be some areas that would have failed, some areas that have done very well. Say, for example, in your knee pain intervention, it helped for the player to go back to sports, but it did not reduce his pain, right? So if you find something like that, then you need to go back and check why did it not affect pain. So probably you left out one important component. So you evaluate, do the planning again, right? And take the action again. So this is kind of a model of action research, where you have to plan, take an action, evaluate, replan, take an action, evaluate. So that keeps on going until you're really satisfied, or your clients or the community that you're rehabilitating is really satisfied that their aim is achieved. All right. Now, I have been part of few action projects before. I'll discuss one here. So again, going back to because it's quite relevant to you guys based in Gujarat. So this was through Colors Foundation. So I met them through the United Nations online volunteering program, where they were looking for someone to help them with their biology curriculum for urban slum children in Barodara. So I contacted the founder, and when he came to know that I was a community physiotherapist, this is what he had to tell me, that there is an increase in the back pain among the women and their children in urban slums of Vadodara. And is there anything you can do about that? Right. So this was a really new thing for me because I was never part of any project like this. And this goes way back in 2012. So then I decided to visit this community and understand what their problem is, right? Why they're getting back pain, and are they open to exercise? Are they open to, just education? What is it that they want? All right. So firstly, identify the problem, and then I planned to visit them, and this is what I'm going to do. So have a plan before you go. Then I spoke to them and realized that ergonomically, there were many things that they were doing wrong, right? So, what we planned was we planned to do some health literacy because that was the most feasible way to go rather than planning an exercise intervention. So, we planned on doing some health literacy on that is basically giving them knowledge on how to do things right, not too high, such very small changes in the way they do things. So in order to do this, what we did was a pictorial booklet. So one page has the right way to do it, and the second page of school going age had back pain. So then what we did is we went to their schools. So since we went through the schools, we could access our community of kids, of school children, and then we did a very similar health literacy program on ergonomics for their back, again using a similar booklet. All right. And we encourage the school teachers to follow up, like especially in their PE class, like the physical education class. The teachers could just follow up in order to reinforce their learning. Now, then what happened is, so this was our, so planning's done, intervention is done. Now we are doing an evaluation. So for evaluation, as I said, it's usually done through research, and this being a small NGO, a very, naive or a very young NGO, they didn't have a research wing and they had no idea about research. So then what we did was we founded the research wing at Colors. So you can see in line 4 that Mr. Koti is the founder of the NGO, and that's me. So we founded the research organization, and then we went on to do a lot of evaluation of of the interventions that were already being done by the NGO. You could Google this organization up. They're doing some really good work, especially with the underprivileged communities in Gujarat. And this is one of the research publication that has come up and has been cited quite a lot. And this is the other one. So that's how you evaluate in order to see how best you can fill the gaps and evaluate your own progress. All right. So that's with the action research project. All right. And then we realized, okay, let me go back. So with the evaluation, we realized that we need to have a novel intervention. Like a booklet is good, it improves the health literacy, but it's not of much interest to the communities after a certain time. So then we went on to look at martial arts because the founder of the NGO is a black belt in martial arts, and he has seen a lot of interest in the children with the martial arts. So that's something that we are still exploring. And with me here and no more in India, it's taking longer time for us to understand how to go about with the project. But that's something that came up in the evaluation. So we need to plan a project on try on seeing the feasibility of using martial arts with these kids, and then go back to planning, intervention, evaluation, and all of that. So that's how your action research projects work. And you can it kind of gives you an immediate feedback on how good your intervention is. So that's a very nice way of planning your project and continuously evaluating to see whether there are still any gaps to fill, and there will always be gaps, because what you're targeting is a very small thing, like a little drop in the ocean. So there will always be gaps. So that gives you more opportunities to plan better and fare better in your evaluations. All right, so that's with your action research. Now, going on to academic projects, what I mean by academic is I've done a lot of research, surveys, and focus groups with physio students to see what their motivation is in not taking up community physiotherapy, right? So, all of that. Um, so I am doing a lot of work with physio students in India. I mean, I visited ARIP as well, I think in 2017, 18. Once I visited in 2015, and then in 2017, 18. Um, so yeah, so sorry, I was just looking at the chat box. I think Dr. Bala has sent you some messages for you guys to read. So academic projects are mostly targeting the community of physio students. So that's been my interest as well. And I've published a lot in that regard. And my papers have also been used to redesign curriculum, especially in the states of Maharashtra and Karnataka. So one of the successful academic projects that I was part of, uh, yeah, was a textbook that came out in 2018. I'm not sure if you guys have got a chance to go through this. So I was the sub editor on this series of textbook. It's a 2-volume textbook, and it's probably one of its kind in the country, because I don't think there are any textbooks specific to the Indian context of community physiotherapy. So it took about 2 years for us to come out with the book. It has about 35 to 40 authors from all over the country. So it was a huge project. And with me in Australia and the other two on the editorial team in India, it was quite a task for us to have these meetings and go ahead with the drafts and, contact the publisher and all of that. But glad that this is out. So this is an example of an academic community project where you come up with something, tangible that's going to help the community at large. All right, great. Now, I've tried to give you some idea about community physiotherapy, especially in the Indian context, and hope you have found some interest now in community physiotherapy, because that was my primary uh, interest in having a lecture with you guys. Firstly, I would like to thank the team at ARIP, your institute, especially Dr. Bala and Dr. Dave. They have been wonderful. And I have to say, ARIP is one of the very few physio institutes that I've come across that have been extremely progressive in their teaching and learning strategies. So you guys should consider yourself lucky to be in such a privileged institute. And also the kind of work that they're doing in community physiotherapy is extremely commendable. So make use of that. Try to get yourself involved in the community projects that are running at your institute. That's going to be highly rewarding later on. I would also like to thank my supervisory team here at the University of Sydney for the learnings that I've got so far, and the kind of support that they've given me in collaborating with institutes like ARIP. Secondly, I would like to thank the National Center for Cultural Competency at the University of Sydney, through which we got to visit the rural and remote communities in Australia. St. Jude India Childcare Center, that's the pediatric oncology NGO that I was talking about, and the participants of my research projects. It's always wonderful to interact with different communities and see what their challenges are. And it gives you a lot of learning. I mean, I've been in this field of community physiotherapy for the past 10, 12, 15 years, and I'm still learning. So it's quite an enriching profession, I feel. And you guys have just embarked in this journey, and I think you should make good use of it. Um, I think, yeah, thank you all for taking time and coming to my talk today. And I think, as Dr. Bala has already mentioned, I uh, would be happy to answer any questions you may have. And I guess there's already one from Dr. Dave. So I'll just read out the question and then discuss the answer, or rather, what my thoughts are about the answer. So Dr. Dave's question is, what are the challenges working in communities in India compared to developed countries? That's an excellent question, Dr. Dave. The challenges are very different. First and foremost, I can give you an example of certain projects that I'm working on currently. So I'm working on Indian migrant communities with back pain, and also there is some parallel projects going on in remote communities in Maharashtra. And the first and foremost challenge that is being faced in a developing setting is of funding. So if finding it very difficult to find funding to run the project in India, while in developed countries like Australia, I wouldn't say that funding is easily available, but it's not as difficult as it is in India. Secondly, the awareness of community physiotherapy in Australia is very high as compared to that in India. So it's a challenge to start in the first place. So it's firstly it's to get people interested. Like the communities have to be interested in your work or in what you want to do with them. So that in itself is very low. And thirdly, community physiotherapy is considered as a great profession here, which probably is not the case in India, and that's what I've found in my research work with physio students as well. For some reason, it's not perceived as a very good profession in India, and if that's not the case, then we talked about resources and manpower. That in itself becomes a huge challenge. So I think these are the major challenges that I have faced so far working with communities in India and working with communities here. So as a follow-up question, Dr. Dave wants to know how to improvise the perception of community for their physical problems. So the way it works here in Australia is they do these public health campaigns. So through these public health campaigns, like through maybe television advertisements or putting these big hoardings with famous personalities, so that kind of changing people's beliefs about health, especially back pain. Since I'm working on back pain beliefs now, the public health campaigns held when was that? I think a decade ago. Have found to show positive impact on the beliefs of pain in the communities here. So I think that's one way to go. And the second thing is once so you need to find some insider or someone who has a good connection with the communities in order to just have a casual talk with them, to talk about these are your problems that you're facing. I know it doesn't seem as a big deal for you, but this is what is happening if this problem persists, like say diabetes or obesity. So if diabetes is going to go on, you're going to end up with sores in your feet, you're going to lose your vision, those kind of. So basically awareness and public health campaigns, I think that is the way to go, and that is what has helped here. So might as well try it in a developing setting. I'm not sure if how effective they would be in a developing setting, but I think that's the way to go. Yeah, but first and foremost, you need to take the community into confidence. Unless the community has trust and confidence in you, it's very difficult to make them understand that there's a problem. So I think those are the things. But yeah, so those are the things. How easy or difficult it is to do a focus group discussion. I just finished mine as a part of my PhD, and it has been lovely doing the focus groups. I really enjoyed them. Now the problem with the focus group is not actually doing the focus group, but getting people for the focus group. So here, how we did it was there was a community educator who was already working with the Indian migrant communities. So, with the help of that community educator, I was able to access the communities here. And in India, the rural and remote communities that we work with in Maharashtra, they have an NGO that they trust, which has been working for them for the past 3 decades. So it was easy to get participants to do the focus groups. Now it's good that the focus groups take place, like you get participants to do the focus groups, but how to do a focus group, like what questions to ask, that in itself is a skill. So that's one of the skills I learned during my PhD here. While it's not a straightforward question and answer, because that's what you do in a survey, but a focus group, you need to ask different types of questions and different types of follow-up questions in order to get the most out of focus groups. So that in itself is a very different skill. It's not just conducting a question answer session. It's not about that. It's very different. And if the focus groups are not conducted well, you might end up losing on a lot of information. So yeah, so I think that's what I would suggest about focus groups. Thank you, Dr. Dave, for your questions. So do the students have any questions? So there's one from Heta Patel, is that right? How would you approach the NGOs in India who are working in this field? Excellent questions. So I would say, to start with, that's how I started. I'm typing out service. So not sure if you all could read that, but that's how I started my journey with NGOs in India. And you just need, one starting point. It's like a domino. Like once you start, it's easy for you to connect with the others. So, and the other way to do it is identify what type of NGO would you like to get associated with. So say for example, the one working in rural Maharashtra, they have a wonderful website, a lot of publications, and they're very established. So it was easy for me to connect to them just dropping an email. And the way it works with anyone is, unless you know someone there working with the NGO or someone who has worked with the NGO, they wouldn't entertain you. So try to find out through your connections, through your networks, if say somebody knows someone at that NGO. So the way it worked out for me with this NGO in Maharashtra is, they already knew my professors from my undergraduate program. So I used their reference in order to get associated with this NGO. On the face of it, it's not easy. You might never get a reply from them, but you need to keep trying. And if you can go through a trusted source like the United Nations Online Volunteering Service, where it's like a registered portal for all the NGOs throughout the world. You can also find NGOs in India. And if you approach through this portal, definitely they know that you are serious about your work with them. So it's not easy, but you need to keep trying. Yeah. And find out people who work with NGOs, right? So it's easier for you to connect if connect through someone whom the NGO already trusts or knows. Yeah, I hope I answered that question. Hita, thank you for the question. Any other questions from the students? I think probably I should stop sharing. Yeah, great. So any other questions from the students or the staff? Let me put myself on mute. While we wait for questions, all I wanted to say was, it's a real privilege to be enrolled in a physiotherapy program in the first place, and it's a bigger privilege to be enrolled in our program at ARIP, where they do wonderful work with the communities. So please make use of that. Don't lose interest in community physiotherapy. There's a lot that can be done. It's just that there's a lack of awareness among the physios and the students and the communities in India about how powerful this profession can be. So you are just starting your career in physio, so just make use of that. Is all I can say.
I just have a comment on your presentation. It's wonderful to have you after 2 years virtually, and hope and thanks to you for accepting our invitation week of time. And then the insights, whatever you are given to the students, hope it will be useful for them, and then make them thought process that physiotherapy also involves community, and it can give a lot of new ways, like you have shown in the research part, action research, and then the academics. So you just given some diversified opportunities for them to choose whichever they want to work on, along with the linkage with the NGOs. As you said, like it's the starting point where you require. That is the reason why we have just kept the first year and second year students, and we have requested circulated across the through online, like people who would like to have an explore what is a community physiotherapy, and then they can still work on with a lot of NGOs and then a lot of researchers still. And the way you have shown one of the slide, like how to have the research questions, like a systematic review, and then the next one was cross-cultural adaptation, and then third one was you are going for the back pain belief questions, and then how the process of flow of research can be there. Hope that the students would get benefited, and then they just try to explore the future of their career. So I'd like to thank you on behalf of our university. I'd like to thank the University of Sydney also for the efforts what have been given from your side. And thanks to your chairpersons, I think Claire and Kathy, for both of them. Hope to meet them on the next session. Thank you from our side for you.
Thank you, sir. That was a wonderful synopsis of my talk, and it's always good to connect with you guys. There's a lot of learning, and I really appreciate the innovativeness in learning and teaching that you do. Yeah, and Kathy and Claire would they are just waiting to join, so they'll be joining on Monday. Yes.
Thank you, madam.